Today we are off to France, to a time after King Henri II was killed in a jousting accident. This left Caterina de Medici effectively running the country as the regent for her sons, with 3 of her sons becoming the kings of France, one after another. But in her court, another child who would later become a major player in the French history was growing up alongside her children. That child was Henri of Navarre, who would later become King Henri IV. To understand how young Henri of Navarre ended up in Catherine's court, we need to first look at his mother, Jeanne d'Arbre. Jeanne d'Arbre was Queen of Navarre. In 16th century, Navarre was in a rather awkward position, geographically, politically, and existentially. Its territories straddled the Pyrenees. It had once held a significant region across the Pyrenees into the Iberian Peninsula, but Spain had taken most of it by the time Jeanne inherited the throne. What was left on the French side was a bit modest, shall we say, at least compared to what it used to be. So naturally, the Navarrese weren't huge fans of Spain. But even with the loss of the southern territories, Jeanne's French holdings were nothing to sneeze at, and in France, she still wielded significant influence. Her territories, along with much of southwestern France, were hotbeds for the Huguenots, the Calvinist French Protestants. Jeanne was originally born Catholic, but she chose to convert. Why? Hard to say for certain. It may have been genuine religious conviction or pragmatic politics. One possible reason was sheer spite towards Spain, the staunchest Catholic bulldog in Europe. Another reason might have been her vision. She wanted to make her son King of France, and frankly, she thought Catholic France wasn't going to offer that chance. She figured that if a religious war broke out, and all signs pointed that way, then perhaps, just perhaps, she could ride the wave of Huguenot success to the French throne. Bold, certainly. Mad, quite possibly. But how can she, the Queen of Navarre, want to make her son the King of France? Jeanne came from French royal line. Her mother was Marguerite of Angoulême, sister to François I of France. A formidable woman in her own right, Marguerite married once, lost her husband, and remarried Henri II of Navarre, not to be confused with Henri II of France, Caterina de Medici's late husband. Jeanne was the result of that union, so Jeanne was quite high up in the line of succession. Not that it helped. France didn't allow women to inherit the crown, but it meant her son might one day wear it. Jeanne married her first husband at age of 12 by the order of her uncle, King François I of France. The groom was 25-year-old William, Duke of Ulis-Cleves-Berg, who was actually the brother of Anne of Cleves, the 4th wife of Henri VIII of England. She refused to marry him and refused to walk down the aisle, so she literally had to be carried to the altar. But ever the headstrong and precautious girl, she executed a document before witnesses, declaring that she did not consent to this wedding. And 4 years later, after the alliance with the duchy lost value to France, she was allowed to annul the marriage. She got married again when she was 20. Her second husband was Antoine de Bourbon, Duke of Vendôme. Jeanne did in fact love her new husband. He was a man known for his good looks around the French court. He had royal lineage too, but with much fewer ambitions than his wife. She soon gave birth to several children with Antoine, and 2 of them, a son and a daughter, survived beyond infancy. Happy days for a time. But Antoine found rural life a bit provincial. He didn't share Jeanne's ambition for Protestant nation-building either. In fact, he thought her plans were utter nonsense and possibly dangerous for the family name. He was also a notorious philanderer and took in a new mistress who was a lady-in-waiting for Caterina de Medici and quite possibly one of her spies known as the Flying Squadron. And under her influence, he was drawn more and more to the Catholic side, pledged loyalty to the crown, moved to Paris, and started enjoying court life again. Then he was even appointed to the position of Lieutenant General of France, commanding the French royal troops into battle against Huguenots. To Jeanne d'Arbrès, her husband became a lost cause. So she pinned all her hopes on her son. In Navarre, they called him Enrique, but the French called him Henri, not to be confused with the other dozen Henris floating around in 16th century Europe. This one was special. Or at least his mother thought so. Unlike most noble offsprings who spent their days being tutored into oblivion, young Henri preferred galloping about in the mud, staging mock battles, and leading packs of children like some miniature warlord. No one would call him a prodigy, but he was always the leader of the gang, bursting with unshakable confidence and an admirable disregard for decorum. Jeanne never missed a chance to remind him of the enormous burden resting on his small, muddy shoulders, the precarious state of Navarre, the enemies at the gate, namely Spain, and the rather grand dream of one day becoming King of France. Unfortunately, Henri was still too young to grasp much beyond swordplay and snacks. In December of 1560, King François II of France died from illness. This was the husband of Mary Queen of Scots, whose story we covered in another series of videos. François' younger brother, Charles, became the next king as Charles IX. And with this change, Antoine decided to bring Henri to live at the French court in Paris. So Jeanne traveled to Paris with Henri. Along the way, something extraordinary happened. As they passed through Huguenot towns, people poured into the streets to catch a glimpse of the boy. In one square, a guard lifted little Henri high into the air, and the crowd roared into delight. The boy, they believed, was their Protestant future king. But then, as soon as they crossed the Loire, the atmosphere turned chilly. They were now in Catholic territory, where Jeanne and her Huguenot entourage had to make every effort to stay out of sight. They had to rely on Catherine's personal guards, who were sent to escort them. After the exhausting journey, they finally reached the capital. Caterine greeted them in her usual fashion, with a smile that told you absolutely nothing. Henri, meanwhile, was rather surprised. He had expected something out of a nightmare, a scary witch. His mother had painted Caterine as a terrifying creature, part regent, part dragon. But in person, she was just a plump, middle-aged woman in a lot of black fabric. And that's how Henri's life at the French court began. He was introduced to Catherine's surviving children. Her eldest, François II, had already died by this point. The next two, Elizabeth and Claude, were married. Young Charles IX was the king. Then there was Henri, the future Henri III, followed by Marguerite, who would later be called Queen Margot. And the youngest was Hercule, who was not quite heroic enough for the name, and would later be renamed François after his late brother. Henri of Navarre was about the same age as Marguerite. Charles and Henri de Valois were a year or two older. Hercule François was 2 years younger. They were all hovering around that peculiar age just before adolescence hits and everyone gets awkward. And they became fast friends. Well, sort of. You see, Catherine's children had been raised with lots of lace, etiquette tutors, and indoor voices. Henri, on the other hand, had grown up chasing goats. He was what one might diplomatically call unschooled in refinement. And as such, he baffled the Valois children. For example, one day, he climbed a tree with his bare hands and disappeared into branches just for the thrill of it. Another time, he was pushing Marguerite on a swing, then suddenly grabbed the swing stop and kissed her right on the mouth, to the shock of the attendants watching them. Naturally, the courts talked about it for weeks. And it wasn't just empty talks. Being of the same age, it had long been suggested, half in jest, half in earnest, that Henri de Navarre and Marguerite de Valois might make a convenient match. The court, ever fond of a tidy solution to dynastic tensions, had whispered of such a union for years. But for young Henri, he didn't have such a serious thought at all at the time. He was just being a delightful menace, rugged, unpredictable, and charming in a way only a small, feral boy with a crown in his future can be. In 1562, an incident known as the Massacre of Vassy occurred, signaling the start of the long war of religion in France. This was a murder of 50 Huguenots by the troops of the Duke of Guise, who was a leading Catholic hardliner. With the tensions between Catholic and Protestants rising, Antoine was feeling uneasy. His wife was the Queen of Navarre, a well-known supporter of Protestants. His brother, Louis de Bourbon, Prince of Condé, was also a prominent Huguenot leader. And so he wanted to make his position clear and decided to publicly declare his Catholic faith at the French court. He also demanded Jeanne do the same, threatening to have her arrested if she refused. The Queen Mother, Catherine, also tried to persuade Jeanne to go along with it, even if it was just for show, for the sake of the children. But Jeanne simply refused to let go of her Protestant faith, and fearing for her own safety, she left Paris to head back to Navarre. Antoine insisted that Henri should remain with him, so she left with her daughter, Catherine. On the way back, she had to stop at Vendôme, which was her husband Antoine's estate. When she arrived there, the Duke's retainer welcomed her, but she sensed something was amiss. And she was right. Antoine knew she would stop at Vendôme, so he sent a word to Vendôme to his people to detain her there so that she cannot cause any more troubles. So when she arrived at Vendôme, she was welcomed in by her husband's vassals. They thought they can provide Jeanne with safe place to stay until she decides to leave again, at which point they would simply close the gates, and she, being a woman of ready understanding, they would not need to say much more. But what they did not anticipate was about the 400 cavalries that followed her. They were mercenary troops in the pay of the Huguenots. And realizing that Vendôme wants to detain her, she ordered her husband's people to open the gates and allow the cavalry into town. Without clear order from Antoine about what to do about the cavalries, the Bourbon retainers had no choice but to obey Jeanne's order. And once they entered the town, the mercenaries proceeded to ransack the Catholic churches and destroy icons. And in the middle of the chaos, Jeanne's retinue managed to leave Vendôme and headed straight to her territory in the southwest. While the first war of religion between the Catholic and Protestant forces raged on, Jeanne supported the Huguenot forces financially from Navarre and fortified Navarre against a possible invasion. Her husband was now her enemy, but not for very long. It was not because they reconciled or anything. Antoine was mortally wounded in a battle later that year. The next year, she received a word from Caterina de Medici. She wanted to meet. Was it a trap? Maybe. But she had not seen her son for over a year. And Catherine's invitation to Jeanne was not just a social call. She needed allies. France was groaning under the weight of its religious strife. Catherine and her children and their supporters were Catholic. But unlike what you might expect, Catherine's primary enemies weren't the Huguenots. Her true adversaries were the ever-ambitious House of Guise. The Guise, backed by vast estates northeast of Paris and a fanatically Catholic following, had formed the Catholic League, a political and military juggernaut determined to eradicate Protestants in France. And in the process, they threatened to reduce Catherine's own influence. And as for Jeanne, she had no illusions. Her ultimate goal was to see her son crowned. But for now, a greater threat had to be dealt with, and that was the Catholic League. And her enemy's enemy was her friend. And so, with their interests aligned, they agreed to end the war for now. But as the guarantee to the agreement, Catherine insisted that Henri remain at the French court. It was, from the beginning, a calculated arrangement. And as for Jeanne, she needed the war to stop, at least for now, so that Huguenot forces can catch a breath. So she agreed to leave Henri at Paris, at least for now. Now, how did Henri take all this? For him, it was just another place. And all that fight about religion? Having grown up under a Catholic father, Henri had no real qualms about attending the Catholic Mass, much to the dismay of his mother. A painful compromise, no doubt, but Jeanne had no real control over his upbringing. And Catherine, ever the political tactician, she wasted no time in exploiting this small victory. At the time, with the return of peace, even if a fragile one, Charles IX had taken to touring France. It was a theatrical gesture designed to project royal authority across a fractured realm. Catherine arranged for young Henri to accompany him. The intention was clear, to parade the so-called Huguenot figurehead as little more than a compliant follower of the Catholic king. And as Catherine instructed, Henri trailed Charles like a well-trained page in a public demonstration of his loyalty to the crown, at least in appearance. Now, this tour was not a short weekend trip to here and there. It was a long tour of the entire country that lasted more than 2 years, spanning 1564 through 1566. Jeanne saw her opportunity. She asked Catherine to allow her and Henri's sister to join the entourage so that she can oversee her son's education on the road. Catherine had no real good reason to deny this. After all, isn't it better for Jeanne to be under her guards rather than skimming God knows what away in Navarre? So the little family finally reunited under the watchful eyes of Catherine's court. And once Jean joined Henri again, his education shifted quietly back toward the Protestant faith. Jeanne instilled in him the values she held most dear: piety, restraint, and a solemn sense of duty. Henri listened with respect, though not without inner turmoil. He was, after all, a young man who grew up at the French court, surrounded by its many charms and temptations. The court ladies in particular held a certain sway over his attention. Thus, Henri's mind became a battleground in miniature. His mother's austere morality on one side, the allure of worldly pleasure on the other. And this tension will remain with him even into his adulthood. By 1567, 5 years into what was effectively a gilded captivity, the time for escape finally came. Catherine's suspicion had softened. Jeanne and her children had played their parts to perfection, obedient, deferential, even cooperative. So, when Jeanne expressed a desire to tour her estates with her children, Catherine agreed. But of course, Catherine dispatched an entourage of guards to accompany them. That first excursion was uneventful. Jeanne toured her estate like she said she would, and returned to Paris just like she said she would. That calmed Catherine's nerves. So, much later, when Jeanne asked to go on a second tour of her estates, Catherine sent far fewer guards to accompany them. And that's what Jeanne was hoping for. She led her children in a daring flight, racing across the countryside to her stronghold in Béarn. And against all odds, they succeeded. And at that time, Henri was just 13 years old. And even with all these excitements in his youth, the real drama in his life was only beginning. And we will continue with the story of this little family in our next video.